On the third night of a Caribbean cruise in 1998, 23-year-old Lynn Bradley posed for the ship's professional photographer. It was a standard vacation souvenir. But the next morning, when her mother went to the ship's gallery to buy the prints, she discovered something that caused her blood to run completely cold. Hundreds of passenger photos were neatly pinned to the gallery walls, but every single photograph featuring Amy was entirely gone. Someone had physically cut them out and taken them. They didn't want her picture. They wanted her. Less than 2 hours later, Amy vanished from her cabin balcony in the dead of night. The cruise line insisted she simply fell into the ocean. But 7 years later, an anonymous email arrived in the family's inbox containing a dark web photo that proved Amy never went into the water at all, and the nightmare was only just beginning. To understand how someone could vanish from a locked cruise ship, we have to go back to the days leading up to March 24th. Because Lynn Bradley wasn't just grabbed at random, she was being watched. From the moment the Bradley family boarded the Rhapsody of the Seas, crew members began showing an unusual, almost obsessive interest in Amy. She was vibrant, athletic, and stood out in the crowd. But what the family thought was just friendly hospitality quickly turned dark. On the second night of the cruise, a group of ship musicians from a band called Blue Orchid approached Amy. They invited her to a private beach party when the ship docked. Her family noticed the interaction, but cruise ships are marketed as safe environments, so no one panicked. But the most unsettling encounter happened in the ship's elevator. Amy's mother, Eva Bradley, later recounted a chilling moment. A crew member stepped into the elevator with Amy, looked directly at her, and said, "I've been looking for you. We have your photos ready." At the time, they thought he meant the standard souvenir prints. But looking back, the family realizes the terrifying truth. The crew already had a file on her. They were tracking her movements, learning her schedule, and deciding exactly when to strike. By the night of March 23rd, the trap was set. Amy went to the ship's nightclub with her brother, dancing and laughing. But witnesses later told the FBI that several crew members, including a waiter known only as Yellow, never took their eyes off her. When the nightclub closed at 3:30 a.m., Amy didn't go straight to sleep. She went out to the open deck with a member of the band. And that was the last time her family would ever see her smile. The Rhapsody of the Seas. Cruise ship was supposed to be an escape, but for the Bradley family, it became a trap. At exactly 5:15 a.m. on March 24th, Amy's father, Ron, opened the cabin door. He saw his daughter sitting on the balcony deck chair. She was calm, watching the dark ocean waves pass by. It was a normal, quiet morning. He went back to bed, leaving the door unlocked so she could come back inside whenever she pleased. 30 minutes later, at 5:45 a.m., Ron checked again. The deck chair was empty. Her cigarettes and her lighter were left sitting on the small balcony table. Her shoes were gone. Amy was nowhere to be found. What happened in those 30 minutes remains one of the most heavily debated timelines in maritime history. The family immediately demanded a full ship-wide lockdown, but the cruise line refused. For nearly 4 critical hours, passengers were allowed to freely exit the ship, and dock workers walked on and off the vessel in Curaçao. The trail was growing cold before the search even began, but the most unsettling detail wouldn't come from the ship's logs. It came from a Canadian tourist named David Carmichael, who came forward with a terrifying encounter from that exact morning. David Carmichael was standing on a beach in Curaçao, just hours after the ship docked. As he watched the waves, he noticed 2 men walking along the sand. Between them was a young woman. She was wearing casual beach clothing, but her behavior was entirely wrong. She looked disoriented, her arms held tightly by the men on either side of her. Carmichael noted that she looked terrified, but in the bustling tourist crowd, he assumed it was a family dispute. It wasn't until he returned home and saw Amy's face on the news that he realized what he had witnessed. She had been taken off the ship alive. 5 months later, another chilling encounter occurred. A man named Alistair Douglas was at a hotel bar on the island when a young woman approached him. She looked directly into his eyes and whispered a haunting sentence. "My name is Amy, and I need help." But before Douglas could react, 2 men stepped out from the shadows, grabbed her by the arms, and pulled her into a waiting vehicle. The island was becoming a maze of dead ends. The local police refused to cooperate with the FBI. Cruise ship officials claimed innocence, and the Bradley family was left chasing ghosts in the Caribbean heat. Until 2005, when the mystery shifted from the beaches of Curaçao to the darkest corners of the internet. When a crime happens on land, the rules are clear. The police arrive, the tape goes up, and the area is locked down. But when someone vanishes in international waters, the laws of the world simply dissolve. The Rhapsody of the Seas was registered under a flag of convenience, flying the flag of a foreign nation to avoid strict American laws. This meant the FBI had 0 immediate jurisdiction. For the first few critical days, the cruise line controlled the entire narrative. When investigators finally pushed their way onto the vessel, they encountered a wall of silence. The FBI focused heavily on the ship's crew, specifically the waiter nicknamed Yellow and the band members of Blue Orchid. Witnesses had placed Amy with them in the early morning hours just before she disappeared. But when detectives went to interview them, stories began to shift. Logbooks from that night were suddenly missing or incomplete. The cruise line aggressively maintained that Amy must have committed suicide or slipped overboard. But the forensic evidence told a completely different story. Investigators calculated the physics of the balcony. To fall over the railing accidentally, Amy, an elite collegiate swimmer, would have had to physically climb over a high, secure safety barrier. Furthermore, the ship was heavily populated and crew members were stationed on the lower decks. If a body hit the ocean water from that height, someone would have heard the impact. Yet, nothing was reported. It wasn't an accident. It was a calculated evacuation. Investigators began to suspect a highly organized human trafficking ring operating right under the noses of the passengers, using the cruise ship as a hunting ground to scout victims, copy their identities, and smuggle them into foreign ports without a trace. For the Bradley family, the years following Amy's disappearance weren't just filled with silence. They were tortured by near misses. In 1999, just a year after she vanished, a dual national American soldier stepped into a public restroom in a department store on the island of Curaçao. As he walked toward the sinks, a young woman ran inside, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. She grabbed him by the shirt and looked directly at him. She said her name was Amy Bradley, and she begged him to hide her. Before the soldier could process what was happening, 3 men burst into the restroom. They forcefully pulled her away, telling the soldier to mind his own business. Because he was on active duty and feared a diplomatic incident, the soldier didn't report the encounter to the FBI until after he retired from the military, months later. By then, the department store, the men, and the woman were entirely gone. But the most haunting clue would be found right on the cruise line's doorstep. A tourist vacationing in Barbados, another port the Rhapsody of the Seas had visited, walked into a local cafe. When he sat down at his table, he noticed a stray matchbook left behind by a previous guest. He picked it up to throw it away, but noticed handwriting on the inside cover. Scrawled in messy, panicked ink were the words, "I am Amy Bradley. They are holding me near the docks. Call the police." Handprints, whispers, and scribbled notes. The psychological horror of the case was becoming clear. Amy wasn't trapped in a hidden bunker underground. She was being moved in plain sight, hidden among the thousands of oblivious tourists who flooded the Caribbean islands every single day. When the anonymous email arrived in 2005, the Bradley family didn't just see a picture, they saw a ghost. The image on the adult website was high resolution, cold, and deliberately provocative. The woman was lying on a bed under a harsh clinical light. But when Amy's mother, Iva, looked at the screen, she didn't look at the clothing or the setting. She looked at the eyes. They were the exact same piercing green eyes. The jawline was identical. And on her arm, the distinct, intricate tattoos Amy had gotten just before the cruise were clearly visible. For the family, it was the ultimate confirmation of their worst nightmare. Amy hadn't fallen into the ocean. She had been targeted on that ship, tracked through her stolen photos, and smuggled off the vessel to be sold. But on that website, her name wasn't Amy, it was Jasmine. In the dark world of international trafficking networks, changing a victim's name is a calculated tactic of psychological warfare. By stripping away her real name and forcing her to answer to Jasmine, her captors weren't just hiding her from FBI search engines, they were systematically erasing her identity. It was a deliberate attempt to break her spirit, ensuring that the collegiate swimmer from Virginia completely dissolved into a phantom, hidden in plain sight under a generic pseudonym. The FBI immediately intercepted the image and ran it through advanced facial recognition software. The forensic analysts came back with a staggering conclusion. It was a 98% match. In the world of forensic biometrics, a 98% match is as close to a definitive yes as technology can get. But the most terrifying theory to emerge from the photo wasn't just who she was, it was where she was. Experts who study international trafficking cartels noticed the specific layout of the room and the digital signature of the website hosting the image. They realized this wasn't a low-level local operation. Amy had likely been cataloged by an elite global network that caters to wealthy international clientele. A network that specifically targets Western tourists because they can command the highest prices. The photo was a digital billboard, showing her off to buyers while keeping her hidden in a country with no extradition laws. The Bradley family hired private investigators, ex-special forces operatives, and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to track the digital footprint of that single image. But by the time a raid could be organized on the suspected Caribbean compound, the digital trail was wiped clean. The website vanished into the dark web. Today, the Rhapsody of the seas still sails the oceans. A pristine white vessel carrying thousands of oblivious tourists over the exact waters where Amy vanished. A $250,000 reward still stands for anyone who can provide the final piece of the puzzle. But as the decades pass, the question still echoes through the Caribbean waves. Who took the photos off the wall that morning?